technical difficulties. That happens when you're doing everything remotely, telework, what have you. Internet service sometimes can be spotty, but sometimes it's operator error. And usually that's what happens with me when it comes to technology. However, I do like to think I'm probably even a little more tech savvy than most of my colleagues in Washington. We'll usually find the answer, find a way to get this working again. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Live with Rodney. We're here today with Randy Moore. Randy is the CEO of the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists. Now, you may ask yourself, what does a nurse anesthetist do? Randy, welcome aboard. You're here during our coronavirus Live with Rodney episodes. Tell everybody who's watching this, what does a nurse anesthetist do?
Well, thank you, Congressman, for having me. It's a pleasure to talk with you and your constituents today. So nurse anesthetists have been around for over 150 years. In fact, we were the first specialty in anesthesiology, and we do everything that is involved in the provision of anesthesia and related care. So think about the fact that nurse anesthetists represent over 50% of the anesthesia workforce today. We are the predominant anesthesia provider in rural and underserved areas, and I know that you represent a lot of those areas, Congressman. And we are the predominant anesthesia provider in the Department of Defense. So, when you think about the anesthesia care that's being delivered forward in forward surgical teams in combat areas, 99% of the time, that's a CRNA, a nurse anesthetist that's doing that. So we have a pretty rigorous background and educational preparation. So we're critical care nurses that move into 3+ years of anesthesiology training and intensive clinical education. And then we graduate, we become board certified, and then we enter the workforce, and we do about everything you can do in anesthesia.
Well, you mentioned hospitals, rural America, like I represent, and in many urban areas like I represent. CRNAs, the certified registered nurse anesthetists, are the ones who are there to ensure that elective procedures, surgeries can happen at critical access hospitals like the one in my hometown. And it's our largest employer that's outside of the retail environment. So our hospitals matter. CRNAs play a vital role in making sure people in rural America have access to those elective and diagnostic procedures. Tell us, though, how has the pandemic affected CRNAs nationwide?
Well, it's like a lot of other healthcare workers, it's been a particularly cruel period of time. If you think about, because of elective surgeries were stopped for a period of time, and we're starting to resume those now. So we're starting to see an uptick in the elective surgical procedures that stopped. Nearly 50% of the CRNA workforce was impacted adversely in some way, meaning their hours were cut or they were furloughed. The other side of this is that the other 50%, or a large percentage of the remaining 50%, were moved into COVID response teams. They are still intubating patients who have COVID-19 or are critically ill. They're managing their ventilator. They're providing critical care services and ICUs all across this country. So it's been a particularly challenging time because a good portion of the workforce has been furloughed, but now they're coming back to work. And then the other portion of the workforce has been intimately involved in taking care of these very sick patients.
Well, you mentioned furloughs. Over the last month, I've heard that healthcare providers during this pandemic have been furloughing nurses, furloughing medical staff, cutting benefits, forcing paid time off. How's this possible when every time you turn on the news, there's a story about overworked nurses?
Yeah, it doesn't seem right, does it? And that's one of those concerns that we have at the AANA is, the cumulative stress of taking care of critically ill patients for a long period of time is something we're very concerned about, and we're providing resources to our members. But your question about furloughing nurses at the height of a pandemic and having them adversely impacted financially, and some of which they have bills to pay just like everybody else, and so it's not right, and so that's why I'm so proud of your leadership, sir, and to work closely with you in the introduction of the legislation that I think we're probably going to talk about, and to preserve that workforce and to take care of the people who are stepping up and exposing themselves and putting themselves in harm's way.
Well, Randy, thank you. And it was great to work with the Nurse Workforce Protection Act. And it's a bill that I've introduced with my colleague, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi and I have been friends since we got elected together in 2012, and we've worked together on a lot of common sense issues. And this bill, all it asks our hospitals to do, we know they're hurting. We know they were told that they couldn't provide diagnostic procedures, elective procedures, and we understand that. But we also understand that we've given now 50 billion of 175 billion. So there's still 125 billion left to go out to our medical facilities, our clinics. And at the same time, I've advocated, and our governor listened to me when he changed his executive order and he began allowing clinics and hospitals to reopen. So now that those procedures can be done again, now the government's not telling those facilities to stay shut down and to just treat COVID patients in emergencies, we see light at the end of the tunnel. And since that has happened, since there's still $125 billion left to be given to our hospitals and medical facilities, we work together because I think both of us, and I think America realizes that we ought to hold our hospital and medical facilities to the same standards we're asking the mom and pop shop that have gotten a loan through the PPP program to follow. Keep 75% of your workforce employed. Have some standards there so that we don't add more to our unemployment rolls. Unemployment was at historic lows just a few short weeks ago, and now we're at Great Depression levels. Yeah. If you're going to take money from the federal government and you're going to be able to have that help provide you bridge funding, just like our small town businesses get with the PPP loan, I think we should have the same standards across the board. Don't you, Randy?
Without a doubt. And, obviously we know that there are hospitals and health systems, particularly in the rural areas that are hurting. The last thing that we need and the last thing that those communities need is healthcare professionals put out of work. And then have those healthcare professionals have to leave those areas and seek employment opportunities somewhere else. We know that, particularly in rural areas, hospitals are the lifeblood of those communities. And so while we're very supportive of the funding that's going to the hospitals and health systems, they do have a responsibility and an obligation to the nurses and other healthcare professionals who work in those facilities.
Well, they certainly do. And remember, rural America has been affected by the COVID virus a lot differently than urban America. There aren't a lot of cases in many rural communities that require hospitalization. And when government's telling those hospitals to shut down all elective and diagnostic procedures at the same time, that's frustrating. But now that that's open again, that's why we introduced this bill now rather than early on in this pandemic. It's frustrating to all because we're fighting this pandemic, but let's work together to make sure that we don't add to the unemployment lines. Yeah. We don't add to the unemployment problems in each state. Let's keep people employed, especially if you're going to ask the federal government for money to give you bridge funding during this pandemic, so that you come out as an entity like a small business will, and as a part of our local sales tax environment that they need to still continue to be once this pandemic's over. We need our hospitals to thrive economically, but we also need the people who work in those facilities to thrive economically after this pandemic too. So, as you know, as we've seen in rural America, there's a lot different impact of COVID. Now, How do you see the economy reopening again, and how do you see nurses and nurse anesthetists fitting in to this reopening as we move forward and get on the other side of this pandemic response, Randy?
Yeah, that's a great question, Congressman. And I think, unfortunately, we're not going to see a snapback in terms of the economy, particularly the financial impact to the healthcare facilities. It's not going to be, I think, pre-COVID levels for a little bit of time. And the reason why I think that is if you drill down on what's going to be and what's already happening in healthcare facilities, there's not a lot of people right now particularly interested in going to hospitals for elective care and elective procedures, right? I don't suspect that's going to change in a measurable way until people have confidence in the fact that the virus is under control, and then when they go to seek these services, they're not exposed. And that includes, I think, elective surgery. So I think we still have some long, tough days ahead of us. But I do think, and I do agree with you, that it's time to start to reopen areas of the country and areas of this state in Illinois that appear to be positioned quite well for that, right? We're obviously taking our direction from the medical professionals and the scientists, and it's clear, particularly in rural America, that those communities are ready to go in many areas of the state, and certainly within the country as well. So, yeah, I think the economy is still going to be touch and go for a little bit. I think it's going to take a while for consumer and patient behavior and confidence to increase. But this is as you know, this is a remarkable country, and Americans are going to be ready and to come back when it's time.
Well, I certainly hope you're right, and I agree. And as we go through this, this pandemic response, as we'll see some comments pop up. Outstanding response, Randy, from Maria Popesel.
She's my
Maria, thanks for your comments too, and Randy, thanks for joining us. We've got some other comments too that have been put forth by some constituents. I see from Mark Vanderwade. I've seen many nurses and other healthcare workers being furloughed because some portions of the healthcare systems are working at 110%, while other areas have been scaled back drastically. Thanks for thinking of the healthcare workers who are struggling as well. Hey, thank you, Mark. And I also want to say, respond to Tim Fogel's question. He's asked me, why didn't I support the HEROES Act? Well, the HEROES Act was a $3 trillion bill that was put together in a partisan way. It was put together with zero Republican input. There are bound to be some good things in that bill, but what do 70 pages of election reforms that go well beyond this pandemic, what do they have to do with helping us get through this pandemic and helping us make sure that our nurses aren't furloughed and aren't forced to take paid time off at the same time where we still have $125 billion left to give out to our hospitals and medical facilities. So there's a lot of things that we can do, but governing together is what has made Congress, I think, Congress will be judged historically going right back to the partisan ends of the political spectrum that I think most Americans are frustrated by, Randy. Tim also mentioned, I don't know anything about nursing. Well, that's why I got Randy Moore on the line. He does. He knows a lot about CRNAs. And frankly, I live with a nurse. So I get a chance to learn about nursing every single day that I come home. But I appreciate your confidence, Tim, and thanks for being on and spending your time with us and not spending it harassing somebody else online. Lisa, Bowling Sinkhorn. Lisa, hey, great to see you again. Thanks for not supporting the HEROES Act. Hey, I appreciate your confidence there. Hey, Randy, you got any final comments before we go? But I just want to say thank you again, and thanks for what every CRNA does to make sure that our families can get access to the healthcare procedures that they need, no matter where they live, be it in a big city, be it in a smaller city, or in rural America, like where I'm at here in Taylorville, Illinois today.
Sure. So I'm a Chicago guy now, but I was born and raised in Springfield, Illinois. So Central and Southern Illinois still has a big place in my heart. So it's always a pleasure to connect with my roots. And I will say, in terms of last comments around the work that you're doing to support nurses and hospitals, I guess I'll end it with this and say that this country is really seen something remarkable in terms of how nurses and other healthcare professionals have stepped up in some extraordinarily trying times, and they're exposing themselves to real risk. And I'm just so proud to be representing a segment of that profession, nurse anesthetists, who are right now saving patients' lives. And I want to thank you for your leadership, Congressman, and I look forward to working with you on this and other opportunities.
Well, it's been great to work with you and the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists since even before I was elected to Congress.
That's right.
What you do, everybody does. Thanks for taking the time today and joining live with Rodney during our coronavirus fight. We're going to continue this process. We'll have more to come in the next few days with guests just like Randy, and we're going to talk about what's important to you, what's important to this pandemic response, and what's important about getting the economy open in the United States of America again. Hey, Randy, thanks for joining us on Live with Rodney. We're out.
Thank you, sir.